All right, well, welcome back. Sorry for the short break that some of you had there, but I almost felt like since we're a smaller, more intimate group, we should be like debating everything we've heard up until now. I will appreciate that, one of the great things about events like this is we hear many sides to these very complex problems. And being a geneticist, as I was thinking about all these behavioral topics that we just recently heard about how do you change consumer behavior, I always remind myself there will be a genetic component to that as well that we probably don't quite understand either. Anyway, we're going to talk about something that's a little more tractable, which is what are some of the solutions that innovation can provide to the farm, and how can we help really accomplish, I think, where this whole topic is going, which is really about, how can agriculture change and shift the emphasis from productivity to something that is about both productivity and ensuring a safe and affordable food supply and a sustainable food supply that isn't harmful to the environment. As with anything that we discuss in the future, we always have to have a safe harbor statement. This just tells you that everything and anything I say today may or may not come true, so if you invest in Bayer, that is at your peril currently based on only this information. So, I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide because I think a lot of the points have been made earlier today. Maybe just a couple of things. First of all, I fundamentally believe that innovation can help us get there. Bayer, we spend more than 2 billion euros a year in research and development, more than any other company in the agricultural sector. It's a big investment and it's a big bet that what we can bring to farmers can help farmers be successful in this. And that's maybe the second point. One of the things we should always remind ourselves is that there has to ultimately be economic incentive built into these solutions that we're building for farmers. Because farming is not an obligation. Agriculture is, honestly, I always say agriculture is nothing more than a land use decision. And farmers do not need to use land to produce food. One of the very interesting things that's going on, for example, in the Midwest right now is there are farmers being approached by solar panel companies where they're leasing the land from a farmer, and this is highly productive land. So we're not talking pasture lands or lands that have very low use. We're talking about land that is currently has very high productivity, and solar panel companies are coming in and offering the farmer twice as much as they can earn growing a crop. What choice do you think they're going to make? In go the solar panels. And that's not to suggest that that's where everything goes, but I think we have to have a system in place that ultimately will provide the appropriate economic incentives that builds the balance of what we're ultimately trying to achieve, which is how to help customers, for me at least, farmers, make appropriate choices to help us in this tremendously challenging balance between productivity and sustainability. I want to spend the rest of the time with you just over the next few minutes is talking about just 3 new examples of innovation that I see as sort of sentinels of where we can go with innovation and how it can help us achieve this balance. The first one is probably the biggest one. And what this is what we call short stature corn. I want you to think about the Green Revolution and Norman Borlaug and what was achieved in terms of food production for both wheat and rice by reducing the overall height of the crop. Now, in that instance, what they were really trying to achieve is allowing the crop to be then use more fertilizer to become more productive. In this instance, we're choosing to lower the size of the corn crop for different purposes and reasons that I think really fit in well with where we're going. So let me share with you what those purposes are. So first of all, and maybe the most obvious from this picture is hopefully you can pick out the short stature corn. It's the rows of corn that are still standing. Right next to it, you see corn that is conventional corn, so it's the same genetics, just we have the shortened version on the right side. And what you see is the standability of the crop. So one of the big challenges farmers face around the globe is with conditions coming from wind or other types of conditions, which basically cause the crop to lodge or what we call green snap. And that results in crop loss. So you have a lot of corn that's down, it's not going to be harvestable, you have significant yield reduction. And these instances of wind conditions actually are increasing. 2 years ago, we had in the Midwest a tremendous windstorm that swept through a section of the Midwest, hit millions and millions of acres there, and just devastated those acres of corn. A lot of our short corn plots were still standing. So not that it's wind-proof, but it's substantially better to helping the farmer be successful with the climatic conditions that are changing. The second one is the opportunity it represents to help a grower get later into the season in things like nutrient application. So we heard earlier today about the fact that much of the fertility that gets applied onto the field doesn't actually end up in the plant. One of the solutions to help with that is to have better optimization of timing of when fertility is applied. When you have a shorter corn crop, you can actually get in with ground equipment because the booms can go over the top of the field and allow the farmer to do late in-season nutrient application. So it's an opportunity for precision application of fertility, which helps us to be more efficient with the use of nitrogen fertilizers. A third thing that it does as a crop is it also allows us, because you can pack more plants, because it's more resilient to these wind conditions, we can actually pack in more plants per hectare. So we can increase the planting density. That ultimately translates into more productivity. So you get more productivity per hectare, which ultimately also helps with the agricultural intensification and minimizing the footprint of agriculture in that corn crop. And then the last one, where we're still investigating, but it's very interesting, is as we qualitatively look at short stature corn, we see that there's more carbon ultimately that we see going into the root system. And that's an opportunity for carbon sequestration, which is a very important part, I think, of what we need to drive harder in agriculture, which is how we can grow crops in a carbon positive way, where we're actually sequestering carbon into the ground and keeping it there. So putting more roots into the ground is a mechanism of putting more carbon into the ground. So really amazing product. We see this actually fitting literally on every corn acre around the globe ultimately. And we have an approach technically where we're starting with our plant breeding to introduce it into the crop. We'll follow that on with a biotechnology version, which is a better version of the technology. It allows us to have more adaptability across more acres. And also we have in our early research programs genome edited versions that we're building as well to further expand the footprint. The second one is, and we're not the only company working on this, but the idea, of course, of how can we help crops that don't today have mechanisms to do nitrogen fixation the way, for example, legumes do, but how can you help cereal crops like corn or wheat, for example, fix nitrogen? And the path to that is potentially through the use of microbes that naturally do end fixation, and either selection and ultimately adaptation to the corn crop to make that work and make it happen. Our approach has been to use synthetic biology. So we're applying synthetic biology through partnerships. We have a partnership with a company called Ginkgo Bioworks in the US, which is a leader in the synthetic biology space. And working together with Ginkgo, we've had a joint venture working on this whole concept of how can we engineer microbes that basically will infiltrate the corn plant, fix nitrogen from the atmosphere, and then provide it to the plant as an alternative source of nitrogen. And we have some very lofty goals in doing this. There are other startups in the space. Some of them are in the audience today, like Pivot Bio. They also have already even products in the market which are not driven by synthetic biology, but are also trying to help farmers come up with solutions that they can provide to a grower to help reduce their synthetic nitrogen need. And the beautiful thing about nitrogen coming from biological source like that, of course, is it's right there and it's immediately available to the crop. So also very exciting and a very interesting space. And I think synthetic biology in general is going to be a toolbox that we're going to apply to a host of other problems in the future as well. And then the last one, probably the one you've not heard very much about, is a very interesting one, which relates to the whole idea of how do you keep carbon in the soil. So I always like to think about carbon sequestration really in farm fields is anchored on a couple of really very basic agronomic principles. The first is the promotion of no-till or minimal-till agriculture, because it's like a pie crust. The minute you break that crust with a plow, you release carbon into the atmosphere. So one of the best things farmers can do to ensure carbon stays in the ground is not to till. But another thing they can do is plant what we call a cover crop. So using a off-season crop, and there are various types of plant species that are used as cover crops. Those are typically then stay in the soil through the season, and then of course we plant over the top with the next crop in the rotation. What is unique here is that this is a weedy species called pennycress that has been adapted to become actually a cover crop. But not only is it a cover crop just for the purposes of retaining carbon, but it's also being developed to become a cash crop for the grower. So when a grower that's in a corn-soy rotation, they're actually going to have a winter oilseed crop with a harvestable oilseed in the spring before planting in their rotation to soy, which they'll be able to then use that oil. One of the main targets for that market is going to be using it for biodiesel. Now, in order to do that, there's been both breeding that's taken place and genome editing to help to optimize the oil and other features of the product in the seed that allow that seed to be valuable for off-takers in the market. We actually have partnerships with both Bunge and Chevron. Together we co-own Covercress, and we're using that where on our side we're further developing the technology and the crop, and then they'll be further developing the use cases for it. So hopefully with that, you have three interesting innovation examples, I think, of how we're continuing to work toward not just the more traditional things that we do, but how we're helping farmers, I think, in this great challenge of what can we do in agriculture to really make it continue to be very productive, but also to make it very sustainable. So thanks for the time. Very enjoyable sets of panels, and I think we have another panel follow on, and we lost our host, so hopefully they're going to come back, because I don't know if I want to host the next session. But thanks very much.
And thank you, Bob, for the insights that we heard. Now we're going to move on to a panel about, well, I think closely related topic, seed innovation, including the new technologies, gene editing, and how that can contribute to the farm-to-fork strategy, the goals of the EU to achieve sustainability and to mitigate and adapt to the impacts of climate change. So with me in the room, we have Claire Berry. Welcome back to the stage.
Thank you,
from DG Sante, and again, the person to talk to when you want to know where the Commission is with this proposal. We have Eric Gall from IFOAM, Organics Europe, so the representative of the organic farming sector. We have Diana Lenzi, who's from SEJA, the young farmers, the European Council of Young Farmers, so really representing the future generations, the next generations, the younger farmers. And then we have Reza Razolpour, close enough?
No, well done.
Thank you. From Corteva, which is, of course, one of the front runners when it comes to gene editing crops using technologies like CRISPR. So hopefully you can shed some light on what's in the pipeline and what's out there already. But let me just quickly start, and for those of you who haven't been following this topic, a few years ago, European Court of Justice ruled that the so-called new genomic techniques or gene editing techniques that entail using these methods like CRISPR should kind of be governed by the GMO regulation that dates back to 2001. And a year later, or 2 years later, the Commission released a study last year in which it indicated that there is a need for a new legislation, that there is a need for a fit-for-purpose legislation to really address the fact that since 2001, a lot has changed when it comes to editing genes, the way it's done, and what the potential is there. So maybe Claire, if you can you tell us what's the Commission looking for with this proposal, with this new legislation?
Okay, so I'll go back to what you were saying about what happened a couple of years ago, after the court ruling. So the member states asked the Commission to do a study on the existing framework, and what that study showed was that the existing regulatory framework really doesn't fit anymore with the developments in technology. It's very uncertain in terms of how it applies to certain concepts. So to put it in a nutshell, in the report, the Commission said the existing regulatory framework for GMOs is no longer fit for purpose. We also said there are ethical concerns, of course, about changing and bringing in a new framework, but there are also ethical concerns about not making the most of the opportunities that this technology could give us. So following the study, we did what we called an inception impact assessment, sort of outlined the possible ways forward. Over the summer now, between April and June, we've had a public consultation. We just published the results of that, and that says actually that 80% of those who responded thought that the regulatory framework is currently not fit for purpose. So I think that's a very clear response that we need to move on that front. So the Commission has promised a regulatory initiative now. Ursula von der Leyen referred to it when she spoke to the Parliament on State of the Union. What we're looking for is a new framework that will give high levels of safety, of course, because we know that's important for the consumers here, but that would have a clear added value for society and the environment. We want to make sure that small and medium-sized enterprises can access this technology, and the whole sustainability piece is very important in this, because we think that for the acceptability for consumers of having a new regulatory framework for the new genomic techniques, we need to be able to show that there's a clear link with sustainability.
Thank you. Maybe Reza, since Corteva is doing so much on this, what gene-edited crops, what kind of technologies are out there that would enable the EU to kind of have these plants that fit the criteria that Claire was mentioning, so sustainability, contributing to or being more sustainable, responding to the environmental pressures, but also being more environmentally sustainable.
Yeah, thanks, Bartosz. So, as we think about sustainable innovation, and that's a core aspect of our aspiration, our idea is to put as many tools in the farmer's toolbox as possible, to really democratize that technology and allow the grower to make the decisions they need to on their hectare in order to deliver for sustainable innovation. So because of that, we have technologies in this next generation synthetic chemistries. We are heavily into biologicals. We're heavily into biotech for the sectors that make sense for biotech and GM. And as we think about some new emerging technologies, gene editing is definitely in this place. So the way that we think about genome editing is a way to accelerate the conventional breeding apparatus. So what would happen over 10, perhaps hundreds of years through normal breeding, you can utilize genome editing to rearrange the DNA that's already there. You're not introducing necessarily anything new, no foreign DNA. It is just a matter of accelerating what would naturally happen in conventional breeding. It's not a panacea, but if you utilize those types of tools along with the right type of crop protection chemistry, the right type of biologicals, the right type of on-farm system that the grower knows best, then that's the path we believe to sustainable innovation over the long term.
Diana, are you excited about this? Are you what's your take on NGTs?
Well, it is kind of the big topic we are actually discussing right now with our members. We did a workshop about 2 weeks ago because we really kind of put it in a pathway towards sustainability. So exactly as it was said, this is not the solution, it's not the panacea, it's not the silver bullet, but is it an opportunity that could be there for the farmers? Because, I mean, all today we've been seeing the challenges that come through new regulation, the challenges that come through climate change, the fact that we need to reshape, adapt, transform, and change the way that we are farming. And so where does this put the young farmers? What will be the tools that they have? And I might not use the toolbox metaphor. I used to be a chef, so I'll use a cooking metaphor. In my kitchen, I like to have all the possible spices. It doesn't mean I'll put everything in at the same time, because the dish would probably have a horrible taste. But I know that I need to dose different ingredients. I need to understand what different ingredients what effect they can have on the final dish. And so we're looking at it with a lot of curiosity. We're trying to get as much information as possible, because sometimes it's also hard for even a knowledgeable farmer as myself to understand exactly the clear definition, where the difference stands, what the benefits can be for both farming when it comes to farm management. Are there traits that could really go and improve, for example, drought, climate resistance, elements that have to do with the environment? Are there traits that could instead work more when it comes to the consumer side? Because we're seeing that research also goes in that direction. And so where does this put the farmer in the way he is going to kind of redesign the way he manages his farm? No, it's an intricate system. It's not that an improved seed will actually make my farm more sustainable. But if I add that to improved soil management, if I add that to improved irrigation systems, if I add that into a holistic system in which I'm giving the farmer as many opportunities to improve the way he farms, this is definitely one of the things that we're looking at with most curiosity. Also knowing that it's something that will not be available today. It will be available probably, if it will be available, will take time, so that it's a transition where we also have the time to finish assessing risk and result, which is for us very important.
Eric, do you think it's one of the tools in the toolbox? Do you have any concerns? I know that organic farmers often do raise concerns about new technologies.
Well, indeed, I must say that when I hear Reza and Diana talk about genome editing, it sounds very reassuring. But indeed, the organic movement do believe that we need to be cautious, like with any new technology, because we are talking about genetic engineering here. And the changes you can achieve through genome editing are far more reaching than what you can get through conventional breeding, or even mutation like it was done in the 60s and 70s with radiation and chemicals as well. You can access regions of the genomes that you cannot access even with transgenesis. And these genetic engineering methods are certainly not as precise as they are portrayed. You know, you don't only get a change at the target of your DNA, you get a lot of unwanted effects, changes, you know, beyond the target DNA that you want to change as well. And that's why we believe that we need to have a risk assessment and that we need to have a traceability system as well. And this is what the current legal framework provides for GMOs. So, you know, also from a sustainability point of view, we do not see why we should throw away by the window, you know, 20 years of biosafety standards for hopes. You know, we hear a lot of hopes about what these techniques could provide as well, but we do not believe that sustainability of a farming system depends on a single variety or on a trait. You know, like you said, Diana, it depends on it's the whole farming system which is sustainable or not. It's not the variety you use or one product that you use as well. So we are really attached to this multi-dimensional approach to sustainability. If we talk about drought tolerance, for example, you know, it's an example we often hear about how genome editing could contribute to drought-tolerant variety. it depends first and foremost on having healthy soils, with increased carbon content, water retention capacity as well, and having diversity on your farming system so that it is resilient to some of the impact of climate change as well. So we hear a lot of promises, like we heard 20 years ago with the current generation of GMOs, but if you look at what is on the market, it's still herbicide tolerance and BT crops. And I think the first crops which were put on the market through genome editing in the US, it was herbicide tolerance. In Canada with the Cybus canola. And this is what, companies are looking into. So if we want to exclude herbicide tolerance, we don't need to make a whole new sustainability assessment. We can make it a cutoff criteria and say we do not want to allow, GMOs which are made for this specific trait, for example.
You've covered a lot there. I want to let Reza maybe respond to something that you said earlier about the safety and the precision aspects. How precise is this technology? Is it as precise as the industry says it is, the scientists, that you can really, without this, that you can really preempt any kind of unwanted changes? And how to walk us through it. Is it safe? Is it safe?
Yeah, and maybe we can decouple those things. So it is precise. It is more precise than any other technology that's out there. But let's also keep in mind that as I drank that apple juice, as I'm breathing this air, right, my DNA is also changing. There's exposures that we constantly have all the time. So precision doesn't also mean complete and utter safety. If we look at things like biotech and GM, right? So the benefit of genome editing is not really in the biotech herbicide tolerance space. We have other ways in which we can do that. We can utilize genome editing to do that, but that's not the core goal here. The core goal is to take the DNA that's already there, not introduce anything else from a foreign DNA standpoint, but perhaps alter pathways, change the DNA that is existing there, and provide the maximal benefit that perhaps that crop itself over time would develop, but we're helping it get there in order to then provide that combination of different types of approaches from a soil standpoint and others in order to be able to survive in that new climate type of environment.
And are you able to preempt the worries of, for example, organic farmers, that this will not have broader consequences for the environment, for introducing a plant that, yes, maybe it could be obtained through traditional breeding methods, but you're actually doing something much quicker in a lab?
Yeah, I mean, from a scientific standpoint, and from my perspective, this is about a broad innovation that enables things that, again, would naturally occur. I would prefer this over any type of mutagenesis techniques. We're comfortable with mutagenesis techniques. Just because those mutagenesis techniques were used 50, 60 years ago, what makes them inherently more safe? The analogy that I'd use for you is that there's innovation in all parts of our lives every day. I use an electric toothbrush. It is a point of innovation. I love that innovation. If I use that electric toothbrush too hard, I'm going to hurt my gums, but it's far superior than my analog toothbrush, and it's far superior than my finger. So ultimately, there's a certain degree of innovation that can really benefit us because we have real challenges from a climate standpoint around the world, and those can't be solved if we don't bring the amazing science and technology that we have at our disposal to solve these challenges.
Claire?
Yeah, I mean, I hear what Eric says, of course, about the need to be careful, no? And you're right, it's genetic engineering. But I think you're right, it's very different from the GMO technology. Yeah? I think as Europe, we have to be open to innovation. And we especially have to be open to innovation in the current challenges that we're all facing. The sustainability that we want to achieve, the food security issues that we have. I think we have to be open, but we have to make sure the technology is safe. No? So somehow we have to get the balance right. I hear what you say, Eric, about, let's just do a little tweak and say that herbicide tolerance shouldn't be there. We just change the cutoff criteria. But I think now we've got a real opportunity to put in place a new framework which will have a proportionate risk assessment and which won't just take out the negatives, but will also promote the positives in the sustainability agenda. You're right, we have to get the balance in the way that we do that, but I think we shouldn't miss this opportunity.
You mentioned herbicide. Is that one of the things that you would herbicide-resistant crops obtained through gene editing be approved through this legislation? Was that one of the aspects that you're looking at?
Well, that's one of the questions we're looking at the moment. I mean, I think that's probably been one of the criticisms about what's happened with GMOs in terms of having herbicide tolerant. And that's probably not the right way we want to go in terms of sustainability, if I'm pretty blunt about it. So now what we have to look at is what kind of regime do we want to have which will promote sustainability and what we think is the right way to go in terms of sustainability. Obviously, drought is one of the problems that our farmers have been very conscious of over the summer. Pests, I mean, as I understand it, but I'm not a scientist and you know better than I do, in terms of the potential for these new techniques, the potential is quite high in terms of pests and you know, promoting varieties and traits that will be more resistant to pests. So that's one area we can look at, but maybe it's not dealing exactly with the problems that we think are the most important in terms of drought and others that the farmers are facing, no? But this is what we have to look at. We really have to get into the nitty-gritty of how do we want this innovation to work? What do we want it to do? And the two things that we've put out there are, we think small breeders and small farmers should have access to this technology as well, and that's one thing that we should do differently from what was done before. And then around the sustainability, it's very much an open question, a discussion. What do we want to do in that space?
Diana, your take.
Yes, definitely. Also, the position of the farmers in this is one of the things that we're a little bit concerned of, and where will the power game with the seed company kind of leave the farmers? And this is why I really believe a democratized process where we really, and this is what we've kind of been told, is that this type of technique has costs that could really enable many research centers to work on even smaller productions, even niche productions, and kind of really tailor the needs or the specific needs. So again, not creating that one silver bullet. It's not the super seed that solves both food security and sustainability all at once, but it will be different opportunities that are given to the farmers, always weighing out, I really believe, that the role of farmers in the value chain and how does this actually kind of downstream in what we want sustainability to be. So the more sustainable choices of farmers, how do they get translated into something that then becomes comprehensible for the consumer? And this is why I truly believe that transparency will be something that is absolutely crucial if we want this to be something that doesn't become does not get that negative emotional perspective that comes from the consumer, because we're still talking about things that are very scientific, are very nerdy in a way, and hard to understand for the average consumer. And so, being that sorry. But I really believe that we do have a lot of issues that need to be looked at really, really carefully. So the idea of a framework, and that's the beauty of it, it's not just like saying we're going to, I think, open all doors and do whatever you want and just run free and wild and send out all the seeds you want. There will be, I'm pretty sure, very strict parameters, and we need to be able to think that even if there is a very good legal framework from 20 years ago, we can think of something new that is necessary now because of the science of today, because of the needs of today, because of the way that we can also interact with consumers today.
Eric, I think you had...
Yes, I mean, if I may reply to Claire, I think we all agree that we need innovation. Huh? Innovation is crucial, but innovation is not a one-way street on which you are, either in advance or late. Innovation can take many different paths, and different innovations have different impacts on society, on the environment, on the economy of food production as well. And we certainly need innovation in breeding. But we can already achieve a lot with conventional breeding. We are lucky in Europe to have a thriving breeding sector, mostly composed of SMEs, precisely. And we do believe that genetic engineering technologies, because they are protected by patents, are a threat to the political economy of our breeding sector in Europe. And this is what the Dutch presidency said back in 2015. They organized a symposium about that. And I think we have to talk about these issues, because I hear you say, you talk about access, but we cannot deny the fact that there is a very strong intellectual property regime associated to genetic engineering that will prevent the circulation of genetic resources that breeders need to have, to make a creation out of already existing creation as well. And when, I get the impression that these discussions on sustainability are very much based on assumptions. I mean, show me the data about how genetic engineering can contribute to drought tolerance. There is almost no data independently verifiable which is available on this at the moment, whereas we know that we have agroecological solutions, building on soil fertility, water retention capacity, once again, diversity of your cropping system, that deliver results in terms of making the farm system more resilient as well.
Jana, I wanted to ask you, because you also raised a similar concern or an issue of power, and I'll let Reza also weigh into this, but are you concerned that there could be too much concentration of power within who's actually providing these new varieties of seeds?
Definitely it's a concern, but it's a concern that we think will be addressed. It's a concern in the idea that if this fits also in the framework for sustainable food systems, again, the role of farmers within the value chain and the position they have when it comes to the market, and not only how they place their product on the market, but also how they acquire the products they need in order to farm, considering that we're looking at a huge shift in the way that we farm, will need to be discussed. So I think that this is not an initiative that does not fit into a more general kind of set of initiatives that the Commission is taking into consideration, where we will have to find the right balance. But it is definitely one of the things that will have our full attention, such as, and it is also the risk and result assessment, the idea that, as he said, we don't have in this moment data on the true effects, or they've not been provided. But I also think because there's a constraint in research, who would have invested in this type of research, not knowing that we were going to be allowed to use it in Europe. And the rest of the world was looking at different drivers when it came to the use of NGTs. Europe is trying to use NGTs really to even drive sustainability, and it's something that is unique on the global market.
Reza, I just wanted to quickly bring into context a recent report by an NGO, ETC Group, which kind of looked at corporate concentration in the seed sector, trade, all aspects of the food industry. And Corteva was identified as one of the top two, I think, seed companies in the world. But when it comes to genome editing techniques, I think you have by far the most patents on that. Is open source something you're looking at to provide this technology or these patents, or open them up to the broader?
Yeah, that's a good question. So maybe three things to cover on that. So one is from an IP standpoint. So yeah, Corteva has some IP for some uses of some genomic editing techniques. We also have an open innovation platform. We have open innovation licenses. We partner with a lot of very small academic institutions and companies in order to try to deliver those technologies and help them with those technologies and provide licenses. And there's also other genomic techniques that are outside of the scope of the IP license that we have. So ultimately, success here for us is democratization, because the idea is that if the regulations are appropriate and fit for purpose, the barrier to entry won't be so high, because it won't be hundreds of millions of dollars of safety studies that are needed to perform, because inherently there's a different degree of safety. So if we think about that from an IP standpoint, if the regulations are fit for purpose, it should be much more democratizable to small and medium players, academics and others, for a wide variety of crops around the world. Number two is, I'll tell you, regulatory frameworks are a wonderful thing, right? I'm in regulatory. I love regulatory frameworks. It drives companies and it drives others to strive to do better. And as I sit here, we are developing sustainable innovations today that I would not have even dreamed of 10, 15 years ago. And a lot of that is driven by high bar, high level regulatory frameworks, which is fantastic. As we think about this from an NGT standpoint, one thing that we need to keep a very close eye on is if we have a patch quilt work globally of regulatory frameworks, we could end up strangling the innovation if the cost and the barrier to entry is so big that it would only take a Corteva or a Bayer to bring that to market. I'd like it to be in a system where you really do have that opportunity for lots of different players globally, and if you have that harmonized system, that would help from a trade standpoint. And a lot of countries are dealing with this regulation right now. Canada has just finalized some pieces of their regulations for NGTs, and it's very logical and pragmatic from a verification, notification, and consultation process. And I think that different regulatory authorities around the world can learn from one another in this. Pharma figured it out decades ago in getting this harmonized ICH framework. And if we can't do the same thing in the agriculture sector, we're going to actually inhibit our ability to deliver on our sustainability goals, farm to fork, Green Deal here, and the sustainability goals elsewhere around the world if we have these barriers to trade.
Claire, I wanted to ask you, risk assessment was mentioned a few times. Would the new framework be aiming to assess the risk, have a risk assessment mechanism for plants? There is a lot of talk about gene-edited plants that could be obtained in nature through natural processes as well, and whether a plant that eventually comes out of a lab and looks indistinguishable from a plant obtained through traditional breeding methods, would that be still subject to risk assessment?
Okay, so I think what we're looking for is a proportionate risk assessment for the NGTs. So that means we wouldn't do away with it altogether. I know that in other jurisdictions they're being a bit more radical, let's say, but I think our feeling is that it should be a more proportionate risk assessment. I wanted, if I may, to come back to a couple of points as well that Eric and Diana raised too, which is on the seeds and farmers and so on. We will also be looking at the regulatory framework for seeds more generally, and I think we should put the two things together so that we can actually see what's happening on both sides of the equation. I don't mean put it all in one batch. I mean do the process together, no? So that the left hand knows what the right hand's doing. And on patents, of course, again, it's another legislative framework, but I think as Diana said, all the moving parts have to go together. And on patents, I can't see any reason for changing the criteria around patentability, but maybe you'll tell us otherwise, no? But obviously what's important is the way that those who hold the patents use them and enforce them. So you've talked about the platform, but I think the proof of the platform is in the eating in a way, no? I mean, what is the platform going to deliver? I don't see much by way of specific results at this point in time. We're open, but I mean, if you tell us there's more to be done, then let's go back to that. But to come back, Bartosz, to your question about, conventional breeding and NGTs, very difficult to distinguish between the two. I think this is really where we have the debate that's a very important one now that needs to be had around the traceability and what's going on there. And what methods will we use for that? We came up with some different ideas from the ones that have been used already about putting the information in databases, making them publicly accessible and so on. But really we need to fine-tune those ideas, I think, now going forward for this new regulatory framework. But on the risk assessments, I can't see that we can get rid of it altogether. I mean, I think there needs to be a risk assessment, but with a clear link with the sustainability.
Eric, are you reassured by what you heard here today?
No, not really. And I mean, talking about patents, we certainly need to change the legislation, because the current assumption that there should be no patent on essentially biological processes like conventional breeding is being circumvented by the European Patent Office. You have more and more patents that, as soon as they cover a trait or some specific genetic information, they apply to all the varieties that contain this trait or this genetic information, whatever the breeding methods described in the patents, and there is a blurring of a line between conventional breeding, genetic engineering, and this has a direct impact already on breeders. We have patents that de facto cover 100 varieties, like on paper, and some breeders cannot use anymore certain varieties to create new varieties. So, I mean, this is already happening also in Europe, and not only in North America. So we think a legal clarification from the Commission that you should not be able to have any patents on genetic information and traits that can be obtained by conventional breeding or found in nature is really crucial. in this respect. But I want to come back on consumers, because Diana mentioned consumers and the need for transparency. I think there are two aspects here. We know that people who are willing to pay more to buy organic products, one of the things they identify with organic farming is the fact that GMOs are banned in the production process. No synthetic pesticides, no synthetic fertilizers, no GMOs in the production process. If we are not able anymore to guarantee to consumers that no genetic engineering has been used in the organic production process, then we really risk having a loss of trust in organic products. And we know already that the market situation is challenging for organic for the first time in years at the moment because of inflation, among other issues. So we should be careful, once again, here not to blur the line between organic and other production methods. But I think if you want to promote NGTs to consumers, we think that it's in any case crucial to maintain traceability and transparency, because taking away the transparency, which is allowed by the current legal framework, in the name of promoting this technology, is not a good basis to ensure consumer confidence in these new technologies.
So maybe I can address the transparency issue. I know ourselves and other companies have specific, radically open, transparent websites where if there's NGTs that are used to produce a product, we're going to provide information that that product has been produced in that way.
Mm-hmm. Diane, do you have any thoughts?
As I do see the point that the organic sector has certain ideals that are very solid and very important. And again, I'm also an organic farmer, so I feel part of that movement. At the same time, I still believe that there's a space for freedom of choice and freedom when it comes both to the farmer and to the consumer. The farmer who will feel the need, and it's not just the need, who will understand that for his specific system, for his specific farm, there is something that can also come from this, from an improved seed. He will decide if he can or wants or doesn't want, and that's why we need to keep also very under control and be very vigilant. That's the word I want to use when it comes to the seed company and how seeds will be provided to farmers, allowing them to have the choice of using one seed rather than another. And then the same choice will be given to the consumer, who will have the opportunity to understand, and that comes through a lot of knowledge that we need to reinforce, but we've also spoke about this knowledge when it came to nutrition, when it comes, I think we really need to start re-talking to the consumers about what they eat, how they eat, where it comes from, how it's farmed, and involving them in the whole path that leads from the famous farm to the fork. And this is one of the things where they have the right to be informed. I don't believe that the right information normally comes just through a symbol on the front package. I think that this information needs to be much more broader, and I think we have also technologies that allow us to kind of strain that information to the consumer. But it's freedom of choice on both sides of the.
If I may, I mean, freedom of choice includes the freedom not to use GMOs.
Absolutely.
And not to get your crops contaminated with GMOs as well. And we know that we have an issue of coexistence. We haven't seen any concrete proposal to deal with ensuring this coexistence, both for organic and conventional farmers. In these discussions on why we would need a new legal framework as well. And this is a very important aspect, and this is why, the traceability system, which has been working, should be maintained. And we hear that detection is not possible. Well, we also hear some scientists telling us, it is possible. There is no technical bottleneck. It's about funding the research projects that can allow us to develop detection strategies that will allow us to detect these GMOs made with genome editing. Just one last point. There is one tomato in Japan put on the market with CRISPR-Cas, the GABA tomato. Mm-hmm. I mean, I cannot imagine that there is no traceability for it. There is an industrial trait. Consumers buy this tomato because of its increased content in GABA. So there is traceability and consumer information for these traits introduced with genetic engineering. So we do not see why traceability should not be possible also with these new techniques.
Well, and I think that genome editing is a broad-based thing. When you're talking about introduction of a native trait, right, there's some degree of traceability in those situations that is certainly able to happen. There's other applications of genome editing where you're simply driving genetic diversity. You're trying to push the genome to just naturally do as many different things as it possibly could and then select on the back end. That's a very different type of application of that technology, and the framework should be able to address both of those things. I would just want to add to that you know, the lawmakers and policymakers in the EU, the rest of the world is looking to you. Right? And I'm saying this as an American, I say as a Persian American maybe, so I'm saying it as a Persian and an American. The rest of the world is looking to you. Right? There is a huge opportunity for you to create a paradigm that will either create a space where innovation, small academic institutions, big companies, small companies around the world can utilize this type of technology in order to create things that we cannot even think of today in this room.
I want to use that to segue into the consumer angle that was also mentioned before. So I noticed that you avoid using the word GMO, you use biotech. I guess that's the more American, commonly used in the US, and the new genomic techniques will be the European way of saying things. GMOs, they have a reputation in Europe. The public perception is such and such. We're not going to go there, but an average consumer in a country in Eastern Europe, Southern Europe, when they hear genome-edited food, crop, they won't immediately think, oh, it's the CRISPR thing. They're going to think it's the GMO. And Claire, a question for you. Where do you take that?
No pressure, of course, Ressa, in terms of the world watching, but anyway. No, I mean, I think I'll go back to what Diana said, which is, you know, trying to inform consumers better about what's going on in the food chain so that they can make choices. Of course, it's not easy to explain the difference between GMOs and new genomic techniques, but we've started a process. We have a response in the public consultation where we're getting a reply to the effect that those who've responded, and okay, there are not that many ordinary citizens, no, that have responded, but those who've responded say the existing framework doesn't fit the purpose. But we've got to go on, I think, and try and explain what the difference is. There are different ways of doing that, and it's a responsibility that, I mean, also will go to the farmers, no, in terms of the interface that they have with their consumers. But to go back to what Eric was saying, I mean, we're not saying there shouldn't be any traceability. Of course, we want transparency and traceability, but I think the question is how to do it. And just saying to consumers it's the same things as a GMO, obviously, is not giving them the right information either. So difficult as it may be, I think we've got to try and do that. And we will have to convince the European Parliament, of course, and that will not be, well, you know, there'll be all the discussions that come as part of the democratic process. But I think we should at least try, rather than already saying, you know, it's all too difficult and we can't have a go at this, because innovation in Europe in this area is needed. We don't know the full potential. You're right, Eric. No, we don't know exactly what areas it's going to be in, but we've got to work that out together now going forward. In the interest of all.
I want to also follow up. Last week, I think it was last week, you were in London for plant health, the first International Plant Health Conference, where someone from the audience asked you a question about whether if you're concerned that NGT legislation would further demonize GMOs in Europe. And what you hinted at was that you're an optimist that the GMO conversation could also shift eventually, and there could be more acceptance of GMOs in Europe. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, I know you quoted me on this. I mean, it wasn't very, the way that I answered the question indeed responded, because the point was, by doing something on the NGTs, does it mean the situation for the GMOs is going to get worse? No, by distinguishing between the two. I don't know. Yeah, I'm an optimist. I believe as well that if you explain things, you tell things, you give information, then I think, as we heard in the previous panel as well, people that they will make educated decisions. But I don't know. I mean, it's pure speculation, no? I mean, I said what I said because I wanted to be optimistic, but I'm not going to be drawn further on that, I don't think, because that really, you quoted me on that last week, and I said lots of other things that were more important, so I'm not going to fall down the trap again.
Whereas I wanted to also quickly follow up to national agriculture ministers. Whenever they meet and whenever they discuss NGTs, they talk about the drought, the 500-year drought that we had this year in Europe. But are there plants already being made through gene-edited methods, or is Corteva working on something that could be marketed as soon as this legislation is adopted, and that could be the kind of the plant that farmers will plant, and then it will be drought-resistant, drought-tolerant more?
There's a lot of possibilities. I think that when the frameworks are more clear, then that also opens up the door to more heavy investment in those spaces, because we know that there's going to be an appetite on that other side. And science is hard, right? Even this type of science is not going to happen overnight, and it'll take multiple years to develop. So from a time frame perspective, if we also want to hit our 2030 goals from farm to fork and sustainability, then we need to get moving relatively quickly.
But in the US, I guess, the perception of this and the regulation around it. In some other countries as well, Japan was mentioned, where these regulations are different from European market, from the EU, it doesn't appear like there is a drought-resistant, or there are crops that have been obtained through these gene-edited technologies that actually fit the sustainability, the kind of criteria. It seems to be more about some vitamins, some minerals, some content.
But I've been thinking about this a lot, and it can give you a different angle. That is something that can be towards the side of the farm to fork that's the fork, making dietary choices that can be healthier, but also that can open segments of the market that didn't exist till yesterday for farmers, allowing them to get into the market through niche markets. And this is sustainability, because this creates a fair income for the farmers, a new market for the farmers. And so in my idea, generational renewal and change, because we can diversify the market while still guaranteeing that the product that is coming has a beneficial effect on one of the two sides of the strategy.
So let's end at the optimist, semi-optimist. We're out of time, unfortunately. This debate could continue. But thank you for the insights. I think we see that there are still questions that need to be answered by the Commission. And there are farmers who look at it from different approaches. And then we have, of course, the sector that is investing already in it, in the research, and wants clarity on the way forward. Let me just quickly check with my... So yes, the next session will begin at 4:10 p.m. So, or actually not. I don't know. I think we're... Yeah, then the next session starts right after this one. And it will be a spotlight discussion moderated by my colleague Luis on forest emissions and carbon sinks, finding the right balance. Thank you so much.